Hi, this is Karin at KarinDavidson.net, and I'm so excited about this. And I know that's strange to be excited about a grief workshop, but the reason I'm excited is because people need help when they're hurting. And I have many students and many practitioners and clinicians and that have had their own training, but that are this workshop is you'll hear me talk about how wonderful Dr. Adler is and how wonderful this is going to be for you. So I'm excited because I want to get this information out and how to better do your jobs, how to handle your own grief if you're a non-professional or if you're grieving. So I'm very excited to introduce to you Dr. Stephen Adler. One of my favorite things that he says is what we process and find peace with now determines our future. And so I really want, I'm really enjoying to introduce a friend and mentor and all kinds of wonderful things about him. And Dr. Adler is a senior authority in psychoanalysis. He has a PhD in psychology and postdoctorate in post-traumatic stress. His work and commitment have earned him certification in 19 different psychotherapy techniques and worldwide recognition as an expert in Ericksonian hypnosis. During his 50 years of clinical practice, Dr. Adler has delved into the teaching of Milton Erickson, mastering and perfecting the technique of hypnosis, the knowledge of the Ericksonian philosophy and professional experience and psychological trauma that he has encouraged him to develop the neurobiological trauma resolution, which is a special approach for healing various psychological traumas. Dr. Stephen Adler has taught at New York University, where I had the honor of meeting him, New School for Social Research, National Psychological Association for Psychoanalysis, and the National Institute for Psychotherapists. He has served as an international director of the New York Milton H. Erickson Society for Psychotherapy and Hypnosis, and created the ACT Institute for Ericksonian Hypnosis and Psychological Trauma in Brazil. And I've never had that many big words in a paragraph before.
And I'm glad you had to say them rather than I had to say them.
Should have practiced a little more. So this is a really wonderful opportunity to learn from the best. And like I said, I've known Dr. Adler for many, many years, and I'm so very happy sharing this training. So thanks so much for doing this. I'm not just for doing this introductory video so that people get to know you, but also for allowing me to share this amazing workshop that you developed with my students worldwide.
It's really a great honor, and I'm very excited about the workshop and really helping people, both professionals and non-professionals, to understand what loss is and how to process it so it enhances their life instead of traps them in their life.
That's a perfect way to say it. Absolutely perfect way to say it. So my first question, and this is not going to be a very, an hour or anything, but we're going to also share some of the things he's going to be teaching and give you some insights as well, so you get some help from this interview as well. So with all your experience and training, why are you, why grief? What is important about grief training?
It originally started when my business partner at ACT lost his father when he was quite young and felt that he had never grieved. And he kept saying, you need to do something, you need to do something. And I would say yes, and it wouldn't get done. But with the pandemic at this time, there's so much loss on so many levels. And what I found in working in Brazil, and it happens to be true in France and in Spanish-speaking countries, the language doesn't have a word for the process of grieving, for mourning. And I began to realize that, well, in Brazil, somebody dies, and we'll be talking about other kinds of loss in this workshop, but somebody dies, they have to be buried within 24 hours. Their held at the hospital, and people can go into a special room to view the body, but they don't. And then they're buried, and they never talk about the person again. So I started seeing clients that were still grieving 25 years after they lost a partner or a son or a daughter or a friend. I'd say, oh, you had a son. And it was as if it was yesterday, because the grief had become post-traumatic stress. And then I began to realize that we have in many countries prescriptions for grieving offered to us by the culture, the system, or the religion. It's not offered to you as an individual and your own unique way of having to process. It's a protocol that allows you to keep yourself and the community comfortable with loss. But the energy gets entrapped within you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's why, I believe this workshop is so important. And I have a lot of different people that I teach, and both clinical professionals, non-professionals, people who use EFT matrix and other things,
Right.
And plus those who are grieving. So does this workshop cover everybody?
Absolutely. When I started writing my first book, I was told, look, it either has to be for the academics or the general population. And nobody was interested in my first book. So I said, okay, it's going to be for the academics. However, I wrote it in plain, simple English. And my feeling, I didn't need any big words to enhance my ego. I thought it should be understandable. And the most important thing about grief is that as the therapist, and I've run workshops for therapists with this, is when I started running the workshop, 90% of the therapists said, oh, I've dealt with grief. I've had loss. I've done mourning. By the end of the workshop, they said, oh my God, I didn't realize where this energy was stuck. And I also feel that therapists are also people, even though some of us pretend we're not. And when you can feel the importance of your life energy and getting back into life energy and moving forward, then you also begin to acknowledge that we have to, along with joy and happiness, really process some of the pain and the stuck energy so we liberate ourselves so that we can have the life that we were meant to have. And I felt it very important. The book that I wrote on loss, grief, and mourning, I revealed, I don't know if I'd say revealed, I chose to really share the death of so many people that has happened in my life, the loss of my wife through cancer. So I started out with how I got stuck in grief and then what I needed, and shared with you the intimate story, and will be in the workshop, of how I came back to life. I thought after 6 months I'd be back to life. And then I thought, well, another 6 months. And then a year later, I said, everything's fine, except I wasn't going out of my house. And
Sure, everything's fine. I'm just not leaving.
right. And I want to meet people, but they weren't coming to my door. It was really shocking. So my feeling is that what's really important is, as a professional, that I sense within me what all this information feels like, and the energy of it, or the lack of energy, or the energy blocks in it. And as a person who has loss, you don't have to be professional to realize if we don't process it, we lose very important connections. And I want to add that people immediately focus on death, but also at this time, the loss of a pet. How about the loss of identity? And the loss of identity for adolescents in the pandemic is very different than the loss of identity for adults. That you have to move, or you may not be able to define yourself by the same job because it's no longer available. there are so many losses that because life is a process. And if we say, oh yeah, but my dog was 14 years old and it died, it's okay. It's okay for your intellect. Your body doesn't know it's okay. And so in the workshop, I really endeavor to give the flavor to everybody so that you become your own therapist in a way, with sometimes the support of a therapist to help you through the darkest moments.
Terrific. Yeah. And that brings me to something else. Honestly, when you're in grieving, a lot of people don't think about going to a therapist or dealing with it, or they shove it down or something like that, but they might, go on the internet and go like, how do I help this? And so is that enough?
Well, I was talking to my son about this, and he disagreed with me at some point. He said, Dad, I've Googled it, and Google doesn't say that. And I said, Andreas, I have 56 years of experience that Google doesn't have. But he has his reference, I have mine. But in all seriousness, first of all, when people Google it, they usually end up with Kubler-Ross, and those are the stages of dying. Grief comes after that. And so, and some say there are 5 stages, 6 stages. What you can't get from Google, you can get a sentence description or a short paragraph, is the feel of it. So when I talk about the stages of grief, what are the characteristics? What does that look like in you as a person? What are the physical symptoms that you have? What are the social aspects? Because people will often say, well, but your grandmother, she was old, it was her time. That doesn't mean there isn't grieving. Well, you've been grieving for 6 months. You need to get on with life. The social aspects are often the most damaging because they don't meet you where you are and give you support for a process. They tell you, get over it because it makes us uncomfortable. And then how to help yourself, or as a professional, how to help. And most importantly, in the workshop, there will be exercises that you do so that you open to the feeling and emotional state in safety and with enough comfort, but definitely in safety, so that, you're sitting with somebody, and I can be sitting with somebody, and whether it's a client or a friend, and I'll suddenly feel, oh, they're talking about this, but they haven't mourned it. And that allows me to say, and I have said to a friend, I understand your mother died 15 years ago and so on, but I have a feeling something is left unsaid or undone. And suddenly my friend goes, oh, wow. So Google can't give you the sensitivity, and some of the exercises, of course, I've used all on myself and other people who've been in this workshop. So I know generally what it opens up. In other words, what I'm saying is Google can't give you an awareness of what you're dealing with. It gives you a definition. And we need awareness, and we need contemplation in order to process.
And I think too, Stephen, is that, because you've written a book, and that's one, and it's an amazing, helpful, and it's going to be great for people. But when you actually experience someone helping you, it's different.
Yeah. And, many years ago, before my wife died, she said, I want us to go to joint therapy. And we were both therapists. And I thought, that's ridiculous. I don't know a therapist I send my dog to, and we didn't have a dog. So I behaved like a childish partner. And the next morning,
I'm not going to do
that. Right. And the next morning, I said to her, why? Because we're handling it. She said, because I want you to be with me to the last moment. And I may be protecting myself, and you're already protecting yourself. And I said, okay, but I have two requirements. The therapist you choose just has to be smart enough to catch us in our games. She said, okay. And I said, and she has, or he has had to have lost somebody and gone through a grieving process. So they're not afraid of what might happen. We don't, yeah, that this is really important. Now, I'm a little suspicious because she got an appointment with a fantastic person who introduced me to Ericksonian hypnosis within 2 days. I suspect she may have had this person lined up before I agreed. But it was great because, and after my wife's death, I continued with this therapist because she was on the journey with me. And whether you're with a therapist or not, it's a journey. And you need somebody to help provide a container, a safe feeling that I can express my feelings and I'm going to be okay. And for professionals, you need to know that you're on the journey with them. It's going to be a roller coaster, and that you're totally capable of being with them and handling it. And that's what the workshop introduces to everyone, that sense of safety and what it should feel like and be like in your style.
Oh, yeah, because that's what I think is that, when I deal with, because of course I do this work too. And, it's everybody's different. The way everyone perceives things, or how it hits them, or, what they miss, what they, how they miss someone, how they, what's the lack in their own selves. And it's different for everybody. So this is another reason why I like this workshop, because sometimes they don't even know what they're missing because they're such in grief. And so I have to sort of help them, find out, what is it? What is the grief? What is, what all that. And I don't want to go into that because that's your job right now. And so
I will point out that too, what people don't understand. Now, maybe in the future it won't be this way, but men and women generally grieve differently.
Yeah, I heard you say that.
Yeah, and that what often causes difficulty, say if you lose a child or a friend and both of you are grieving, men, and in the workshop we cover it in more detail, but men take action. They want to form a foundation. They want to, I planted a tree, that kind of thing. And women tend to be more emotional and talk again and again about the experience to their female friends. The most important thing is that many of the women don't see the men grieving, but the men are, but it's a different style. And the men, why is she so emotional? She's not grieving. And so I think it's very important for everybody to understand, and we go over the differences. And hopefully one day there won't be differences, but today there are.
Yes, definitely. Well, it's how people are raised. Men are raised to fix things. Women are raised to take care of people. And I mean, I know, of course, we're both talking generally.
Yeah.
So do you encourage people to grieve?
Yes, because, and what you said at the very beginning of this interview was that what we do in the present creates our future. And we all will hopefully have a future full of happiness and joy and prosperity, abundance on many levels. But if we don't grieve, if we don't go through things that cause us anxiety and pain, if we don't process them, we don't really come into the present so we can create our future in the best possible way. I encourage people to grieve, but I also encourage them to be gentle with themselves, that there's no time limit, that there are stages in grief. They never occur in the order they're supposed to occur. And you think you're done with one and the first one is back and then it jumps to another. But there's an essence or a feeling when it's at rest. I won't even say complete, because the other day I smelled the fragrance of a night blooming plant here in Brazil, and it was the same fragrance that my wife used to wear. And suddenly it was so nice to be back with her in that memory, the grieving having taken place. It was not a negative. It was, I'm so lucky to have had that in my life, to have loved, to have had passion. And I honor the time that I had with that. So it's very important to remember it's not, okay, we have to do our grieving now because we want to get on with it. No. And most important is part of the workshop will have the patient's Bill of Rights. The number of things that you have a right to in your grieving, and friends and family and different religious organizations will try and take those rights away from you. But, and grief is an important process. I cannot tell you if I understand death, but I know what it feels like to process it.
Well,
and I think it's important.
That is extremely important. That's extremely important. And I went through something myself where people didn't know, their reaction to me was just, it made them uncomfortable. And so I
Right.
just didn't tell anybody, you know,
Yeah.
because they're more uncomfortable. And I'm like, I just got to deal with me right now.
You're right. Right.
I got to deal with me. So I understand. And that's another reason why I'm really glad that this is happening.
Yeah.
And you said something about what is the biggest mistake that people make?
The biggest mistake that, and when I say it, it's not as if you make a mistake because you're determined not to do it right. That it's a very fine line where you're grieving and you're in the pain, but you don't become the grief. Because once you become the grief, it forms its own identity. So I had a friend that when her husband died, for the next 20 years, she used to say, my dear and darling, lovely Harry. Well, I knew Harry. He was a nice guy. Dear and darling, maybe for her. But her whole frame of reference became Harry, and she never changed the message on her answering machine. So 20 years later, Harry was still answering their phone. Now, maybe that's the extreme, but I think of somebody else, a close friend, and I had to say, they have a lot of physical pain. I said, yeah, because you haven't let go of the pain that's in the grief, and your body is reminding you. They thought, they weren't in therapy with me, they thought that was kind of silly. About 2 months later, they said, I started crying a little bit, and the pains are disappearing. So when you identify with the pain and the grief as a way of being instead of something I process and go through, that's a big mistake. Then it turns into post-traumatic stress.
I had a client who was divorced, and in my intake form, it didn't say how long ago she was divorced.
Yeah.
So I was going through the session, and I'm going through the session, and going through the session. I was like, "How long were you divorced? How long ago were you divorced?"
Yeah.
She said 25 years.
Yeah.
So she never even grieved about the divorce, and she's holding on to it.
I have a couple that's in the process of a divorce, which has turned out it will be a very civil divorce, but they started going through the divorce and it was like this.
Right.
And I said to them, would you mind keeping an old man happy? And they said, what? I said, well, what I want you to do is start a grieving process, but we don't want to be with each other. That doesn't matter, I said. And I sent them a copy of my workshop and my book. And all of a sudden, the divorce turned civil because they were really fighting, not about the fact that, it was good for what was good, and then it just wasn't for either one of them, but they didn't know how to grieve. They didn't know they were in grieving.
It's a long time to be with somebody, and,
yeah.
At that time, you promise your life to each other, and now it doesn't work. And there's a part of you that just is hurt and feels
Yeah.
empty, and it's a grieving process, even if you want it gone.
Yeah, and I had a couple that was trying to have a child, and she became pregnant, but she only carried the child for about 2 or 3 weeks, and they both went like this. And I said, it's a grieving process. And then they even eventually found a ritual. They have a back terrace, and they found a beautiful handmade tile, and they set it in the terrace to remind them of the passing of their first pregnancy, because there was life and then there wasn't.
Right.
And it was so
That
important.
ritual thing about honoring something, you talk about that in your workshop too, right?
Yeah, very, very important. Yeah.
Well, Stephen, this has been great. I'm really so glad you're going to be doing this. And so before we close, can you just talk a little bit about your book, and
Yeah.
wanted to bring this message to the world?
Yeah, well, I want to thank you too, because you said, hey, you're a healer. Why don't you get out there and bring this message beyond Brazil and beyond your private clients?
Right.
And I thank you, and I thank God I was ready to hear that. I'm at a time and a place in my life where it's not about ego, but I can share what I've been through, both in terms of my training and my experience in my life, in a way that people can take what they need away from that, and it benefits their life. And to me, that kind of information shouldn't be kept secret. And then as I wrote the book, I kept Eduardo and his saying, I haven't grieved in mind. And I looked at my own process, but I also looked at people's processes in different communities and in different cultures. And there are many things that could be very useful. And so I put that all in the book to help people choose what they needed for their journey. So what I can say is, I think it's different when you write it from the heart. And I'm not telling anybody what to do, but I'm telling them what they can create. So it's theirs and their journey, but it liberates. If you had told me after my wife died that I would have the life that I have today and the joy I have today, and I would have known you were crazy. And what I can say is, it's made me a much richer person, because I can acknowledge a little loss, and I can acknowledge, 2 years of loss. And we've been fed a diet of fear.
Yeah.
And a fear of loss. So I really feel that my book talks to that. And every age too, because I have adolescents who say, I've lost 2 years of my life. Well, I had adolescence and I lost 2 years of my life because I was an adolescent.
Right.
But to bring with that awareness to them, what did they gain? What can they process? And for people who have gotten out of adolescence, I have mostly gotten out of my adolescence, but but the importance of realizing the processing and the continuity, and to be open to the learning and the positive that's there. And that means that we have to process the pain.
And we usually don't have a path, so
Yeah.
this is why I
Right.
think this workshop is so important. And
Yeah.
so, Stephen, again, thank you so much.
Thank
You
you.
can find more at actinstitute.org. This workshop you can find more about this workshop at Karin Davidson, Karin Davidson.net /grief. And I'll put that in the notes here.
Great. A great
So,
pleasure. And I'm
again,
filled with feelings just talking about it.
oh, good.
Oh, yeah.
And I do want to make a comment that, we're smiling a lot here, and,
Yeah.
and grief is a very serious subject.
Oh, yeah.
But what we're happy about is what happens after you move through it, and that
Exactly.
we can bring that path through for people to go through it so that they do, like you said, have a life.
Yeah, and what I can say is that recently somebody said to me, "I'm so tired of wearing the mask," and I said, "Well, it depends on the social situation because they can't see my full facial expressions, and sometimes it's not a smile."
Right, right, right.
But I love what you said because, yeah, to come through grief and to realize that it can bring a smile to your face, the fragrance of that blooming night flower.
So you're honoring her rather than feeling pain
Right.
for her. And that
Yeah.
that I'm sure in heaven where she is,
Yes.
that she's much happier for that she doesn't cause you pain, and instead that you honor her.
Yeah, but I would say two things that's really in the book, that when we go through grief, we honor. And also, she would come back and haunt me if I hadn't gone through that. I remember being terrified because I realized 3 or 4 years after her death, I would have been a better husband, and I felt very badly. And she came to me in a dream and she said, "That's why I married you, that you would continue to grow." And that dream changed my life because I realized it wasn't always easy, but that's why I married her. And that
Now you're going to
we
make
grow
me
through this.
emotional.
Very good.
All right,
Thank,
Stephen. Go ahead. Do you
thank
have
you
something
so
else to
much.
say? Did you?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. I just want to again, I know I'm like thanking you 800 times, but I'm really happy this is happening. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much too.